I am Chris Newfield. I'm the Director of Research for the Independent Social Research Foundation, which is the sponsoring entity here, and where H. Patten, I'm very pleased to say, was an independent scholar for a year. And so this is essentially how it's going to run. I'm going to say a few preliminary things just to provide some context in my own reactions briefly to his book. Then H will speak for however long he's moved to speak. I guess 15 or 20 minutes. We will have our two distinguished commentators, and then we'll open it up for questions. And then there will also is a reception just through this hallway over here afterwards that you're all certainly invited to attend. Anyway, it's a real honor for me to be launching H. Patten's new book on religion and spirituality in Jamaican Reggae Dancehall Dance. H's work both fits well with and also stands out in the body of work that we at the ISRF have been funding. One of the phenomena that we've worked on collectively with the fellows as kind of an ensemble is knowledge that comes from embodied experience. So many of our fellows study situations from the inside rather than from a distance. So for example, last year we launched Mike Macon Waite's book on how community interventions dealt with white supremacist movements in Burnley starting around 20 years ago, where Mike's insight came in part from the fact that he himself had spent years running those interventions for the council in Burnley. So at one point in his book, H writes, quote, "Going to dance hall sessions on Saturday nights, returning home just in time to bathe, change, and attend church on Sunday, I have observed numerous points of convergence and divergence between the dance hall and church hall space. As an insider-outsider within Jamaican African, Neo-African practices, such as Sumina, revivalism, and Dinky Mini, attending church on Sunday, revival sessions, and Kumina duties intermittently alongside dance hall sessions, and moving with dance hall practitioners, I see the same and or similar movement vocabulary recurring across all these spaces in people catching the spirit." So H gives both spirituality and the corporeal body central positions in the study of the dancehall phenomenon on the basis of the authority of his own day in, day out lived and embodied experience. This experience has propelled what I think is the special insight into dancehall that appears in the book. Dancehall is, of course, the exhilaration of music and dance, but it is also two other things. One is transcendence, where dance is a portal between the natural and the spirit worlds. But since I'm about the most secular person raised Catholic in Los Angeles that any of you is likely to meet, I will leave this subject to H. The other issue I'll just say something briefly about, which appears in one of H's pithy statements in the book, quote, "Black bodies are produced in relation to place and defined by a dominant culture that negates their agency." The end quote. So this reminds us that dancehall dance and every other modern form of Jamaican popular culture emerged in the context of the British slave trade, plantation extraction, and anti-black racism. Colonial practice was designed to instill psychological as well as bodily subjugation, and yet dance refused both forms of subjugation, and given the power of the occupying forces, expressed an insistent heroism that was itself a kind of miracle. It was also an everyday miracle, and it expressed an agency in the population that was not negated, at least as I read it, H, on the collective level, even if it was contained politically and legally for generations. Dance didn't only keep hope alive, as I read H, it kept power alive, even kept certainty in a transformed future alive, and it enacted a corporeal capacity and ecstasy that stayed with the body, moving from dance hall to church or to somewhere else in each individual that would enable resistance and a rebuilding of life and society over time. So ISRF fellows often study agency that persists against impossible odds, and H's vision of dance agency is particularly important. And it is also profoundly relevant now, at a time when the Westminster government is trying to stigmatize the discussion of colonial history precisely because they do know that this is a living history that allows racism and disparity to continue in the present. So H's book left me, at least, with the feeling that this backlash, this government backlash, is weak and superficial compared to the corporeal and collective dance powers that he describes. So I closed the book thinking, well, okay, dance hall is a way that justice prevails, eventually. So as for the format, I just talked about that, so we're going to go down the panel, and then we'll turn it over to you, unless H would like to intervene at some point in the middle of that. And so I will introduce each of the commentators. First, Dr. Lisa Palmer, and then Dr. Michael McMillan as we go. And so I'll just say a few words about H right now. H is an associate lecturer in African Caribbean dance on the Erie Dance Theater BA degree course, and also teaches at Goldsmiths College. He received his BA from Christ Church University, Canterbury, an experienced choreographer, filmmaker, visual artist, storyteller, and performer. H has choreographed the Ghanaian, Nigerian, Sierra Leonean, Malawian, and Zambian national dance companies, the Stella Maris Dance Ensemble in Jamaica, and many other high-profile and distinguished productions. He has been awarded the Jamaican High Commission 50th Anniversary Award for services in the field of arts, culture, and entertainment. His commitment to academic research, arts, culture, and education led him to successfully found the Coratech Dance Fest Professional Development Training Program, delivering popular and dynamic creative training and research in West Africa and the Caribbean since 2007. H has also worked on international research projects, including the Open University's Decolonizing Peace Education Project. H, it's really a pleasure to have you with us.
What I'm going to talk about today, can I just move this up a little bit more? Okay, thank you. I was going to just try and present, and because I know that when I don't talk to the paper, then I might talk a little longer than I'm supposed to. So I'm going to try and read the paper, but there'll be a time where I will come away from the paper and come back again, because that's just how dancehall moves me, and you'll see why. So basically today I'm going to talk about my book. It's called Reading Religion and Spirituality in Jamaican Reggae Dancehall Dance. Spirit bodies moving. Now, when you read all of that, reading religion and spirituality in Jamaican Reggae Dancehall Dance, you think that that's the main thrust. But really, what carries us through and sustains us throughout the book is the notion of the spirit bodies moving. That is the thing, that's the thread that runs through. And hopefully you'll see why in a moment. So, the themes that we'll be looking at today, I'll be trying to get you to see past the slackness and violence trope that often comes with dancehall, because reggae dancehall is often seen as lewd, crude, and violent. And I'll show you a clip from the dancehall space in a moment so that you can see what the form looks like. But then I'll go to the book structure, then look at what dancehall is in terms of the spirituality of dancehall. What does that look like? And then I'll look at the reggae dancehall term and the key themes, and then the legacy of dancehall, okay? So, I'm going to, sorry, my computer will go to sleep from time to time, and so if I delay a little, that is it. Okay, so before I start, I want you to feel comfortable, and I want to make myself comfortable. So when I say in, then you have to say out. In, out. In, out. In. Out. Now I use this because, you know, I'm a storyteller, I'm a dancer, choreographer, and within storytelling, within our tradition, when you're going to come in, you don't just jump in. you ask for permission to come in. So when I say in, I'm asking, do I have permission to come in? And you say out because you're telling me I have permission as long as I get to bring out something that is worthwhile, something of substance. And I hope that's what you'll get tonight. So the aim of this book is to explore reggae dancehall as an indigenous cultural expression. The intention is to determine whether it conveys embodied spiritual references hidden within the corporeal dancing bodies, which I'll explain in a moment. The objective is to demonstrate that reggae dancehall represents a reimagining of the strong Jamaican, African/Neo-African religious dance practices. And then I use the term African and Neo-African because in Jamaica, when they're talking about the new African practices, they reference them as Neo-African. Within the UK context, the word traditional has seemed to have become a dirty word, where when people hear the word traditional, then there's all other connotations that are connected to it. And so that's why I use the term Neo-African when speaking about the new African practices. Those are the practices that come from out of the Caribbean, etc., and out of the African diaspora. Okay? As I say, is to look at the Jamaican, African, Neo-African religious dance practices alongside the Christian and postmodern religious practices subsumed within contemporary Jamaican religious and popular culture. A critical examination of dancehall as Jamaican indigenous popular culture provides a window into the spiritual worldview enacted within the daily existence and survival approaches of Jamaicans from the lower class. And in this country, it's Black Africans or Neo-African people. Okay? So that's what we're going to be looking at today. And yeah. Right. And from here, I'm going to show you a little bit of the dancehall so that we know what we're talking about, and then we can go from there. So we're just switching from one interface to the next. Right. So this is the dancehall space that we're going to be looking at. So you can hear the person on the mic, that's what we call the selector. And the selector, he's the one, he acts as an MC, and he more or less directs the dance. So here we're seeing the man section, and you can see the men, when they're dancing, they dance in what we call groups or crews or squads. Okay? I'll go into that a little more later on. But you can hear, you hear that when they're dancing, he's actually calling out the names of the dances. So he's actually publicizing the dances and the dance originators, the creators of the dance as well. Can we jump and play back to the film again? And if we can jump around here, it should be, somewhere around there. Okay, sorry, it's a little further. About let's try. Okay, so now I want to show you a little bit of the female section. So you've seen a bit of the man section, this is the female, and the coupling section. So the female section is much more about the agency of the female and the female body within the dancehall space. So the interruption is because within the dancehall space, there's always the interruption when the selector speaks and informs people and tells them what is going on and where to watch. Now, can you see the coupling section begins to creep in within the female section? And now you can see other bodies beginning to come into the dancehall space. We have the Japanese and there's a lot of Europeans from Russia, etc., who come to Jamaica almost on a pilgrimage to learn about dancehall culture. But as you can see, there's a spirit and an energy that develops as the night develops. And we can see that within the dancing, you can see some of the expressions that they actually start to transcend. Thank you. So, let me continue now. So going back to, okay, right, the next slide, please. So what I want to do is for you to understand what you've just seen. Then I'm going to explain it a little bit. The slackness and violence choke is what a lot of people give to dancehall. When they see what is going on there, the way in which people dance, etc., some people become very shocked and think, oh, this is lewd and crude. But there's something else that is happening underneath it. When we see it, there's a whole development that it represents. So the structure of the book, it actually follows the development of the dancehall event. So the dancehall event, it starts with the sanctification, and so the introduction of the book is a sanctification. Within the sanctification is a cleansing of the space. When they're going to start a dancehall session, they clean the space and then they set up the boxes, the triangulation, etc., and they start playing. When they start to play the music, they tune the music so that all of this is part of the sanctification. Chapter 1 looks at the warm-up and dancehall literature. And chapter 2 looks at, as we say, old-time story, the convergence of African and Neo-African and popular dance in Jamaica. Then in chapter 3, I look at where Come Back Again is moving towards a definition of spirituality. Now, the spirituality is difficult to tie down, so I don't actually look at creating a definition for spirituality that you can say, this is the definition. What I do is outline the parameters within which I'm working when I'm speaking about spirituality. And chapter 4 is the massive arriving. That's a gathering and meshing of knowledge. So essentially what I wanted to do there was to give an insight into the methods and methodology so that people would know what I'm doing and how the data was actually gathered and developed. Chapter 5, Party Time, Early Vibe, is the analysis of dance in the dancehall space. And then chapter 6, Party Hut, the Mandan section. It looks at the corporeal dancing body and how it creates community within the dancehall space and how this is the onset of dancehall spirituality. When chapter 7 is when the party hut up. That's when the females then take over, and the dancehall spirituality then becomes rooted and rooted. So it's rooted in terms of going deeper into the African and Neo-African practices, and it's rooted in terms of showing the span of time. Okay. Chapter 8 is a coupling section where the male and female relationships come out. But in the chapter, I actually describe it in relation to the deities and how the deities manifest themselves through the dancing bodies. And then chapter 9 is the signing off, the revelation. Those are the findings and what some of these meanings actually are. And then with the conclusion, that's like the dispersal, because you go to the dance hall space, you dance all night, you're ready, and then you're going home. Everybody disperses. Okay. So what is dancehall spirituality? Well, in order to understand this, we need to actually look at what is dancehall, because I use the term reggae/dancehall. When I use the term reggae/dancehall, that is to make the distinction between dancehall as a space. And as a space, it has a trajectory that takes us beyond the Middle Passage and of enslavement, taking us right back to the African continent and the spaces within which people would dance. It also, when we talk about the reggae/dancehall or reggae dancehall, then it's a catch-all phrase that covers both reggae and dancehall itself as well. When I speak about dancehall, then dancehall is specifically talking about the distinct music and dance that developed from the 1970s coming forward, mid-1970s coming forward. Some people will argue that dancehall really started around the 1980s, the beginning of the 1980s, 83, where you had the development of the digital sound. But dancehall started before that, when you have Stevie and Clevie, Mama Liza, and all of these people who were singing dancehall at that time. So, sorry, can we go back once more? The other important thing is the corporeal dancing body. Now, the corporeal dancing body is emphasizing intentionally the fleshly physicality of the Black African dancing body and its corpse-like existence, which is symbolically reanimated and regains visibility through the sustaining spirit embodied within African Neo-African dance. So what I'm saying there is that when we operate on a day-to-day basis, we do what we need to do to get through. But we just operate and we are not infused as we are when we go into the dancehall space. And the music and dance captures us, and we then become spirit bodies. The spirit comes back to us and the energy, and that's when we see it. So the corporeal dancing body actually draws on Thomas Fuchs's idea of the live body. The live body is the body that is kinesthetic, the kinesthetic movements. And so those movements, they don't have any meanings until we ascribe meanings. And we do that, according to Fuchs, through the corporeal body. So the corporeal body then adds emotion, and through emotion we get meaning. And so, therefore, this is just a circle. If I'm circling this way, it means nothing until I then start to add meaning for myself, and this becomes beckoning. When we circle on the floor, we circle, and this circle is just a circle, until when we start to circle, and we circle the spirits to trap them and bring them to us in the Yambalu, or Nolinga, 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 Nolinga. Okay? So this is how we work through the spirit. And then the African Neo-African, as I explained before, means the new African. So the warm-up now looks at the dancehall literature, which draws on cultural studies, sociology, anthropology, geography, gender studies, philosophy, and ethnomusicology. And now spirituality and the dancing body becomes an active part within it. Thank you. Right. Yes. So here in chapter 2, Old Time Story, the convergence of the African and Neo-African popular dance in Jamaica, I look at the 3 categories of dance in Africa and the 3 categories of dance in the Caribbean. In Africa, dance is classified according to function. So you have the spiritual dances or religious dances, you have the social or recreational dances, and you have the ceremonial dances. On the other hand, in the Caribbean, we classify them according to origins. So you have the African retention, the European influence, and the creolized or indigenous forms. Those are the forms that would never have come into existence if Africa and Europe had not met on a foreign ground. Okay? And so you can see within the Caribbean, we can also superimpose the African classifications onto the Caribbean one. So a dance like Kumina. Kumina is an African retention. We brought it from Africa, but it's also a religious practice. Okay? And so in chapter 3, one important thing that came out in my research was that in the Caribbean, we always talk about masquerade in the form of John Kuno dance. And John Kuno dance, we're always told that it's a secular form. But because I've done extensive research in Africa as well, within Africa, masquerade is not seen as secular. Masquerade is seen as a sacred, spiritual form. And in the research in Jamaica, it then went on to show that there is a spiritual element. Ken Bilby and others have, I think Diane Stewart, have shown that there's a spiritual element that happens within John Kuno. So it was important that I call on a reclassification of John Kuno so that we look at it as a spiritual form. And this directly connects with dancehall, because within the dancehall space, when they get ready and they put on their clothes, they transform themselves. And they go into the dancehall space, and through the dance, they transcend into those spirit bodies. So the connection between John Kuno and dancehall is important. And I'll rush on with chapter 3. When it looked at the spiritual side, it divided it up so that we looked at it in terms of the African practices, spiritual practices, and within that, it kind of argued that the notion that Africans didn't know about God, and Africans only have pantheons. I argue that is false. There are many people who have written about it, including John Mbiti and Idowu, who actually say that the notion of God was there long before the meeting with the European. And so the idea of the pantheon and the structure, it mirrors Christianity in a sense, in that you have the supreme being, and below the supreme being you then have the heavenly host, and then the earthbound spirits, and then the ground spirits, which are the ancestors who once lived and walked on earth. And so that's why when we dance, it's an ancestral reverence. It's not actually dancing and praising the ancestors as if we are worshipping them. We are worshipping the supreme being via the ancestors, who become the intermediaries. Just like within Christianity, you have the angels and the saints, who are the intermediaries between the supreme being and human beings. So, in terms of the Mandem section, we'll come to that, but the party time is the early vibes. So within the dance hall now, as we get to this section of the paper, the first section of the book is really outlining what the parameters are within which I'm talking about dancehall. The second part now, it starts to look at how the dancehall actually moves and what manifests in it. So we have the sanctification, the cleansing rituals, and the paraphernalia. So part of the paraphernalia is the sound system set itself. That is part of the paraphernalia. You also have the setting up and how, where people locate themselves. It looks like if people come in and they just stand anywhere. But over a period of time, if you study, you'll see that when they come in, there are set places where they stand. So where the selector is, the dancers will stand right in front of the selector so that he can see them to call their names, etc. And so that's going to big them up. Then you have other people who are part of the dancehall space who will come and fit in around, just like how you will have the congregation in the church, and the congregation knows where they sit in relation to where the choir sits, or in relation to where the praise dancers may sit. Okay? And in the early vibe, it outlines the parallels in the preparation and layout within the African and Neo-African practices and the dance hall practices themselves. So music furnishes the myths, symbols, beliefs, values, paraphernalia, and narratives that directs the dance hall ritual and the type of dancing that occurs. So through the music, we know what is going to happen. The dance itself, and some of the movements, we see them used over and over, but just as in the African context, the mood is what tells us the purpose why we're dancing at any moment in time. Okay? So the Mandem section now, that is where we start to look at the male dancers who come in the groups, squads, and crews, as you saw in the video. Now, when the Mandem are dancing, very often females can actually come and join in and be part of the male dance, which is normally choreographed and normally is set routines. And so the females can join in with that where they know them, but the opposite can't happen. A man cannot dance a female role, and that is a way of protecting the female space within the dance hall. Okay? Dance facilitates communitas. That's when they all come together. So therefore, sometimes when you hear a song like Bogle, and you say everybody start to dance, and everybody hand in the ear, and they dance in the Bogle, you get the feeling of communitas. I wonder, could we try just a moment? Would you all like to start? Okay, let's just stand where you are, and then it's quite easy. All we're going to do is use the hands, and we're going to raise them up in the air and circle forward, and we rock forward and forward, and forward. So that's the Jamaican style. But when it came to the UK, it reversed itself. So we're going to go back. As if you're catching a ball, go back, and the arms go forward at the same time. Okay? Good. All right. Maybe we'll try that later on with the music so that you get the feel of it. Sorry. So that was the dance created by Gerald Bogle Levy. And it was really the Bogle dance that really opened up the space for the Mandem to dance. Before the Mandem would dance, but the space was really dominated by the females. But as soon as Bogle came and the Bogle dance came along, then it opened up the space for men to dance. And literally, as Orville Hall will say, they literally pushed the females from the center of the dance. And that's when you start to see, in terms of the dress, the females had to find other ways to control the space. And so that's when you found the bare as you dare, the kind of skimpy type of dressing started to come because they were finding ways and means to be able to re-attract the video light, or as I call it, the spotlight. Because the video light suggests that the video has to be there. But within dance, it's the spotlight. Because the spot, when you're dancing, wherever it is, that's where you become illuminated. That's where you become visible. And so it doesn't matter whether a physical light is there or not. In the UK, it was blues, and so you couldn't see nobody. But the movement, once the movement started, people would gather and start to look. And so with the females, as I'll talk about in a moment, the female circling of the pelvis is what gives them power and control. So we're going to just go through very quick. So the Mandem section, Ding Dong, he actually says, dance, you know, I like my total freedom. When I dance and everything, it just take me out of reality until me done. So really what he's saying is that the dance takes him out of reality for the time that he's performing, and it's when he's finished that he comes back to himself and to reality. So sometimes these dancers, you go up to them and say something to them while they're dancing, they don't respond. Not because they're blanking you or ignoring you, but because they've transcended, they're on another level. Okay? So the social functioning of spiritual religious practices is more than communitas. It encapsulates a liberation based on praxis. Okay? So that liberation is what takes them through. So dancehall is also a signifying practice. So just to let you know, as a signifying practice, you always have a sign, and that sign will lead you to what is being signified and what is the signifier. So a phrase like Jamaica, no problem, will make you think, when you see the sign of the Jamaican flag, you think of the no problem, and then you think of the island itself and the people, etc. Okay? Or if you see the no problem, it's signifying Jamaica. When you say no problem, automatically you think of Jamaica, if you know that slogan and what it means. Okay? So dance becomes that signifier that takes you back. And you'll see how it signifies within the female setting. So the crossing and returning of the foot here, when they're down the flank, they go down the flank, that also connects with John Kuno. When you see the John Kuno dancing this way, and the pitchy patchy, the cloth is shaking. Okay? With the female section, female dancers can accompany the males within the male section, as I said, but men cannot accompany the females. The female signature move is the whining. Now the whining, it takes you through the four corners. So forward, side, back, other side. Forward, side, back, other side. That's what you'll see when they're doing tick-tock. Tick-tock, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then they whine through all of those corners, okay? Now, what we see with the whining is a circle. The circle is continuous, has no beginning, no end. So therefore, in terms of hierarchy is taken away. But also, what it's saying is that the pelvis is the focus, because the pelvis is a life-giving force. We have no control over death. Death can come anytime and take us away, but we have control over the life-giving force. So for each one you take away, we can put it back. And that's what's being signified within the dancehall space. Now, I saw some people's eyes when the women were dancing, and especially when you see them upside down like this. This is where she is taking control of the space, because when they go on the head top and the feet start to flash, number one, people move because they don't want to be kicked. But number two, it means that she's actually emphasizing her pelvis and emphasizing her derriere. And what she's actually saying, she's connecting back in time to the time of enslavement, where she was unprotected, she was stripped, and she was examined, and she had no control over her body. But and part of the reason why she was unprotected is because, unfortunately, the man them were in the same position where they were also on the auction block being examined. And so there is a reminder of the resilience they had to have in order to survive, find a way to survive, and that by retaining their own agency, what we call in what Charles Mills and Rex Nettleford has developed, the whole notion of somadification, becoming somebody of worth, becoming somebody who is now visible and of importance. That is what they do when they take over the dancehall space. Dancing this way, they create the space so that they can then start to do the other movements that they want to do, having created the space for themselves. So corporeal dancing bodies manifest two phases: the transformation in preparation for transcendence. And you'll see that when you see some of them, I think Sonia standing there has a wonderful description of the Higgler woman who was sitting down selling, and then she gets up and she pulls what looked like a little skirt. She pulls it down and it becomes a full-length dress. She pulls it up and turns it around so that the back comes to the front, so that it zips right down, and she has on a special brassiere or bra underneath it, and she puts her hands into it, and she transforms into a dancehall diva. In the same way that she transforms physically, there's a mental transformation as well, where she no longer is the subservient Higgler who calling people to come to her. She now take over space, and people come because they want to see what she's doing. Okay, so transcendence is a key function of the spiritual and religious practice, and that transcendence is what we call Maya, and that is what connects back the dancehall to the what you call it space, the African, Neo-African space. So coming into land, I'm finished now. And the female corporeal dancing bodies are spiritual signifiers through fertility, and Carleen Cooper speaks about that, and communication rituals, as Wright speaks about, ancestral knowledge rituals, which is what I call it. So corporeal dancing bodies perform gestures, which through gestures conjure the spirits, and in conjuring the spirits, it connects back to the African, Neo-African practices, because the same bodies that go to the Neo-African practices are some of the same bodies that come to dance hall. And in having said that, they do not leave the spiritual aspect of themselves at the door. It follows them inside. So, cultural gestures within dancehall triggers deeper consciousness, and the public display of the female region has signification with enslavement that enables her to be able to become somebody for herself now. The display, we might be looking at her performance, but her performance is for herself, not necessarily for the onlooker. And so the coupling section, the term coupling reflects dancehall dancers who use the term themselves, because people used to call it daggering, and they used to look down on them. They took back their agency by calling it coupling. This is where they're coupling their dancing together. And so within the book, I look at the performance and the performatization. That means it's the behavioral actions that go along to make up the dancehall space, okay? And that manifests the spiritual within the dancehall space. So genealogical continuities exist between the mental reggae and dancehall coupling through the rent-a-tile, because they rent-a-tile, that means they stand in one place and they dance all night in the one place. The pelvis might make a figure of 8, it might go around the world, or it twists side to side, and then you start to add a little dip. Sometimes you dip and you're stuck, you have to dip a little more before you come up. So that is it. So dancehall, the centers argue that dancehall is the antithesis of anything cultural or spiritual. But I hope I've demonstrated that there's a lot more going on. And just to finish off, in the 70s and 80s, when you had rubber dub, you know, this is Orville Hall who's speaking. He said in the 70s and 80s, when you had rubber dub, you know, Cool and Deadly, and male and female dancing together, dancehall was losing that. So what he meant is dancehall was losing the intimacy. So Bogle showed men that they could dance, women were pushed to the side. And so through the daggering, that's when we brought back man and woman together. And I'm gonna stop there, because there's a couple of other slides like the legacy and the abundance of dances and dancers that we have within the dancehall space, which I can speak to after you've had the respondents. So I think maybe for those who want to read it, we could just leave it up for now. Thank you very much.
We have 2 respondents as advertised. First is Dr. Lisa Amanda Palmer, who is the Deputy Director of the Stephen Lawrence Research Center at De Montfort University in Leicester. She was the course director for the Black Studies undergraduate program and senior lecturer in sociology at Birmingham City University. Lisa is also a librarian and previously worked for Birmingham Libraries and Archive Services, working with local archive collections, including the Vanley Burke Archive, held at Birmingham Library. Her research focuses on, am I getting this right? Black feminism, Black cultural politics, and the intersection of race, racism, gender, and sexuality. Her writing covers a broad spectrum of fields that include the gendered politics of lovers rock music, the production of local community archives and knowledge production, and the misogyny faced by Black women in British public life. She is the co-author of Blackness in Britain, which came out in 2016, and is currently writing a book on Black women in UK's lover rock reggae scene.
I want to thank H for writing this book, because I think what the intervention that you're making is really to take the question of spirituality very seriously as it pertains to dancehall music. And I think that's crucial, because for much of what you said at the start of your presentation around the perceptions around slackness, perceptions around violence, and how we begin to negotiate the dancehall space through that lens limits our understanding of what is happening. And at the same time, it's as you've noted in your book, it offers a kind of Eurocentric reading of the dancehall. At the same time, I would also suggest that because of, I guess, what writers like Paul Gilroy have brought to our attention around the ways in which modernity, that the making of the Caribbean comes through modernity, the making of our histories in the Caribbean come through this kind of conflation of African retention and being in kind of a discursive and violent relationship to the making of who we are. we cannot really remove that kind of political lens. But at the same time, what we can do is kind of, which I think you're doing in the book, is giving us a language and a reframing of how to begin to question those histories. And I know people throw around the terminology of decolonizing quite often, but actually there is a serious political project around decolonizing that if we kind of really take it seriously, I would suggest that this is what this book is trying to do. It's trying to see ourselves with new, fresh eyes. Something that Bell Hooks talks about in her book Unloving Blackness, on her book Black Looks and her chapter on Loving Blackness, she talks about the necessity, by quoting Malcolm X, she talks about the necessity to see ourselves through new eyes. And I think this is what this book is allowing us to do, to kind of really think through the politics of dancehall and taking seriously those frictions, intersections, tensions between spirituality, corporality, the erotic as well. And I think for me, there's a kind of energy that the book taps into. And going back to a conversation I had with my dear friend Dr. Denise Noble when we had the conference back in was it May?
Yeah.
And we were talking about the outcome of some of that work. And I think Denise mentioned this idea around they can't catch us when they're talking about spirit. That actually when you're talking beyond this notion of the body, beyond the notion of the physicality, when we're entering into this kind of space of the spirit and what it is, it's hard to define. And I think you've acknowledged that in your presentation, that it's not actually trying to define the parameters of spirituality, but it's opening up the space to understand its role, how people engage with that particular theological and the unnamed aspects of our living and being. And I think that's quite powerful for me for the book. I had a whole lot more to say, but I'm going to end it there and just say thank you.
We have time. Don't feel rushed.
Okay. Well, if I've got a bit more time, I'm going to quote I'm going to quote I'm going to quote Carolyn Cooper, and I'm going to quote Carolyn Cooper's work because part of the work that I've been doing, which kind of feeds into this discussion on dance, or is looking at lovers rap music and trying to ask these questions around the erotic, around spirituality, around the kind of energy that exists within the dancehall space, particularly around the question of love. And I think that question of love and the erotic, love and spirituality, those kind of politics and spaces of exploration of how we might be defining ourselves are at the heart of some of the ways in which we imagine and envision questions around freedom. What does freedom look like? And so I think what was quite powerful in your presentation today, H, was the idea that how the bodies of the women who are reclaiming space, how their bodies are moving, how their hips are moving, how they present themselves in the dancehall space. Oftentimes that's, the language of reading those women is through this notion of slackness. But I think what we're missing when we go down the road of thinking about slackness is the ways in which that ability to reclaim who you are is in societies that are structured through particular notions of power, patriarchy, racism, histories of colonialism and imperialism. The ability to reclaim a sense of who you are in those spaces as a momentary form of expression is not only powerful, but it's also something that these women are owning for themselves in that particular moment. And so I think that the intervention. So the quote that I had from Carolyn Cooper is that she talks about the politically conscious tradition in reggae. And what she's trying to do is say that actually these questions around slackness and sexuality are not new. And again, H speaks to this in the book, trying to trace a genealogy of dancehall culture and tracing it beyond the kind of 1980s conjuncture, if you like. And Cooper's locating some of this within the history of actually what we might call roots and culture. She's saying that there's a seductive tension between the erotic and the political that continues to energize the dancehall in a rub-a-dub style. Acknowledgement of this carnal element in conscious reggae makes it possible to hear the continuities in the work of contemporary slackness DJs and that of their forebearers. And if we think about their forebearers, who are the forebearers? Who were they? Who were they in the forebearers were the artists that came before them and how they were kind of narrating that space. And that wasn't devoid of what we might think of as slackness. In fact, I think there's a kind of reluctance to look at the question of sexuality for lots of different reasons, which we could go into in the discussion. But sexuality is one of those points of tension. It's a point of questioning. How does the question of sexuality, who owns your sexuality, how are you claiming your sexuality within the dance hall? Those are kind of some of the key questions that I think we can consider. But thank you, H, for setting out such a rich terrain of knowledge for us to kind of think with. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our second respondent is Dr. Michael McMillan. He is a London-based writer, dramatist, artist, curator, and scholar of Vicentian migrant heritage. His plays and performance pieces have been produced by the Royal Court Theatre, Channel 4, BBC Radio 4 Drama, and elsewhere across the UK. Since the 1990s, Michael's practice has used devised performance, installation, and mixed media in a collaborative context. He has made a number of installations on the theme of black hair, including the origins of the Afro comb at the University of Cambridge Museum of Anthropology, Archaeology and Anthropology. He will bring these interests and practices to designing the set for Rachel Ofori's play, Detangled.
It's really an honor to be asked to be in a respondent here to join with Lisa, and I'm hoping I can build on what's already been kind of shared with you. I was in Suriname last year, where Winti is an African retented religion. And I was in a workshop demonstrating the different ceremonial dances. Then the lead practitioner offered a kind of, he said, to contextualize what we were about to see, he said that African gods really are enacted in all forms of black music, orality and performance. The blues, jazz, soul, R&B, hip-hop, indeed across the whole African diaspora. But they don't know that these are the spirits that are being enacted. It is this kind of knowing, in a sense, that I think Dr. H. Patten speaks to here, and is this incisive and forensic volume. And you know the title. And it really is contributing, really, in a sense, to an embodied vitality, original knowledge to the field of dance studies and cultural studies through an interdisciplinary lens. Now, his primary research is to reimagine the genealogy of Jamaican African, Neo-African cosmology within the context of contemporary Jamaican religious and popular culture. Now, I've known H for some time. He's not simply an academic, but as a dancer and choreographer, and this is quite crucial. And in traveling across the diaspora, highly respected as a practitioner of Caribbean and Neo-African dance culture and practice. Moreover, from within the book, from a kind of ethnographic perspective, he brings his lived experience as a raver into this. And this is quite important, this is very important. Whether that be in the dance hall in Jamaica or on the dance floor in a sound system dance in Birmingham, his hometown. As they say, who feels it knows it. And this is a unique perspective in a sense in the field of dance, cultural studies, indeed academia. Because you have practitioners who may have the expertise, yes, or dance practitioners, but very rarely do they bring their research or their lived experience of social or recreational dance as a raver into their methodology. And there's a term he'd use that I thought he was going to talk pre-ing.
Yeah.
And maybe we can talk about that in
Yes.
as a specific research approach. That is quite important. Now he's bringing this praxis, the intersection of theory and practice, to this body of research. In this concept that he has created, the corporeal dancing body. And it illuminates a kind of synergy between the mind, body, and soul. The trinity, yes, of being and to engage through collective worship. And that wonderful idea that comes from Victor Turner of Communitas, collective worship. And it's just to say something about H in terms of dance and choreography and lived experience of dance. This demonstration here that he gave is quite rare to do that. You know, scholars will talk about it, but they're not going to show it. He did that. That is very important here, just to mark that. And so reggae dancehall, in the context of his research, the soul physically is being moved, is exemplified. And he also uses in the book, and I'm hoping that this book is actually, Routledge maybe can get it out, you know, a version that more people can read, because it's quite expensive at the moment, but that's the academic hierarchy, I suppose. We'll think that's another discussion. But he uses a series of italicized, thick descriptions of the dance moves, and I'll have one here. Quote, jerking and twisting and the pelvis forward on alternative sides, causing each leg to twist forward and the heel of the foot to rise, instigating the swiveling of the ball of the foot as one's internal energy seemingly shoots outwards beyond the boundary of the skin to displace the immediate surrounding air and space. And in a way, what April's showing that, giving you that, but I'm kind of describing it through using a thick description.
I'll just show you this. The Della move, do the Della move.
Yes. Thank you. In the book, there's a kind of theoretical grounding here that includes, importantly, Michel Biserta's ideas of strategies and tactics of the everyday. One, what he calls the poetics of everyday life, the strategies that we use, you know, whether we're going to buy a piece of yam and we're going to always buy a piece of fish if we have enough money, and so forth. John Mbuti's conception of African spiritual and religious philosophy, and this is quite crucial because in a way to engage with that is looking at everyday people's lives. You look at the people first, right? It's not necessarily something abstract, it's actually a lived experience. Victor Turner's Communitas, which connects with this idea of collective worship, and the signifying practice. This is crucial because that also connects to Henry Louis Gates' The Signifying Monkey, or Christine Shinsenska's styling. What is being signified? The styling, because there's a form of styling that's going on here within the dancehall space. And the corporal body, crucially. Now, the corporal body have also their spiritual antecedents in African-derived revival and Kumina dance practices, as well as Black Christianity, and I'm going to say that deliberately here, which is enacted in Jankunu, masquerade, and as H has alluded to, has a spiritual religious quality. But there are also similar trajectories here between religious street festivals and popular dance practices. We think of Shango with Carnival Masquerade in Trinidad, Santeria or Lokomi in African Cuban dance, Voodoo in Haiti, Winti, as I've already mentioned, from Suriname. All of these cultural forms show a similar mode of expression. of liberatory expression against oppressive, hegemonic structures of the Jamaican masses, but also across the diaspora. Now, I'm going to not comment on the structure because H has talked about that, but there is a paradigm here, I think, in the ways that certain sectors kind of come together. Certainly, he talked about the way the structure of the book kind of alludes, suggests the structure of the dance. And I think that's crucial in terms of engaging with that. It's also speaking, in a sense, to what has been migrated from Jamaica across the Caribbean. And as I mentioned, my parents come from St. Vincent, but you know, if you think I'm Jamaican, I'm not going to deny it, because Jamaican is the more powerful culture within, you know, to be Jamaicanized. But here we have, well, how is that migrated? It's migrated through Lovers Rock, through the whole sound system space here, you know, as a raver myself, I confess. But also internationally, through, for instance, the Japanese dancehall phenomenon. And having been to Japan, I've seen it. They are on it. And it speaks to something that is happening culturally across the diaspora, which is a form of adoption, how we adopt, how we adapt, okay, and assimilation or integration of reggae dancehall and other black music genres. It also speaks to migration, globalization. And this kind of echoes Paul Gilroy's idea of the Black Atlantic, a kind of rhizomatic expression of cultural expression, exchange, borrowings, appropriations, subscriptions, inscriptions, I could go on. But it's all part of that kind of hybridized kind of identities that we kind of build. And it's crucial that Lisa had mentioned that modernity begins the Caribbean. In fact, I would go further than there's a point that H had made earlier about the post-modernity of the Caribbean. This is quite crucial, that the Caribbean is a postmodern space. And if we think of reggae dancehall, there's always something of the past that's being reenacted. That is a postmodern kind of characteristic. I'm going to finish here and say that I can testify, I can hold a hand up and be a witness to H's ideas of corporal dancing bodies. From my own embodied experience, recently going to a Jashaka dance to mark my birthday, where the sonic vibrations propagated by the sound system did invoke a sense of collective worship. And anyone who's been to one of those dances will know exactly what I mean. You know, who feels it knows it. And it's what I often call going to church. When I go to one of them dances, it's like going to church. So thank you, H, for sharing this. And I look forward to actually this work being disseminated much wider to people. Thank you.
It is important because Dr. Lisa Palmer here, she has written about Lovers Rock, which Lovers Rock is the form that was birthed out of reggae and out of dancehall. They kind of grew up. You could have said they're almost twins because they kind of grew up together. Although Lovers Rock came first, but as the children of reggae, they were growing up together. And that connection that you talk about, the connection and also the relationship between individuals comes out within the work that she's doing on Lovers Rock. Because, you know, with Lovers Rock, the whole rent-a-tile that came from Mentor, it comes through Lovers Rock, it comes to dancehall. And then dancehall takes it a little further, where it now becomes the connection of the pelvises bouncing against each other instead of moving along with each other and across each other. So all of that shows that, you know, we were in a position where our bodies were the tools that we used to talk. We use we use the romantic love in the dancing. We don't go out and buy, some people will, but the buying of flowers and things, that's not the signifiers of love. But we do it within the dance space in how we engage each other. And sometimes the love is just a pure love for each other, and we move away. And that is why you can go to a dancehall space and see the group of men then come together, and you see a group of women then come together, join the whole night, the man and woman are dance, and then dance finish, and they both, the group of men then go off with them brethren who they came with, and the group of women go off with them sisters who they came with. It's not a pick-up joint. It's not about picking up and finding somebody to go home with. It's about connecting. And sometimes you will connect and people take a number, but that's not the impetus within the space.